Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boxing fans around the world. I've got a pretty interesting update. There's apparently an event that's happening today, this evening, 11 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you are interested in watching some fights, this one I think is worth your time to watch, in my personal opinion. And if you're one of those that watches lesser divisions, this is one to put eyes on, I think, but also just the nature of the event. I just believe that these guys are worth your time to kind of excite you because I do think there's going to be some action packed fights in this event, if I'm honest. But before I get into that pitch, let me talk about what's going on, some other happenings in the world of boxing that I think you may or may not have heard of, but I think they're worth kind of talking through each and every one of them. First of all, again, you know that Errol Spence and Jordanius Ugas is scheduled to happen, I believe, they talked about March that to happen for unification at the welterweight division. That's still in kind of discussion, but it seems like it's going to be a foregone reality now that Stenionis has stepped aside. That's a very exciting fight, but it also, as I mentioned in the last episode, questions where it leaves Terrence Bud Crawford, who, of course, holds the WBO title. Crawford has claimed that everybody in the welterweight division will duck him and go to 154. I don't think that will happen, but an update I'm going to cover a little bit later on may make you kind of think twice about that. Meanwhile, Keith, one time or once upon a time, Thurman, and depending on who you ask, he's come out and said, I'm here. I want fights. He's doing the get back against Mario Barrios, who he was fighting in lightweight division against Tank Davis. And I want to make sure we're clear. Mario Barrios does have experience at welterweight, so it's not like we're just bringing up somebody who's never touched the weight class. He fought at 147 before for some regional title. So it's not like he's new to the division. It's just that he went back down to try to get some championship gold. And of course, Barrios is best known outside of the Tank fight for what I consider a robbery against Bader Akhmedov. I don't think that Barrios should have got his hand raised. I thought he lost that fight, my opinion. But I think he's a solid fighter. I wouldn't call him at the top level, but I think he's a solid fighter that comes to fight. He gives you an exciting fight almost every time. He seems like he tries hard. But I do think he gets arrogant at times, and that tends to cost him fights. But I'm leaning Barrios. And people are shocked. It's like, against Keith? It's like, yes, because I don't know where Thurman's head's at. Anybody can interview solid. We've seen Mayorga. He interviews solid every single freaking time. He convinces you he's going to go out there and do it. Chavez Jr., he interviews solid. He convinces he's going to go out there and do it. And then some of these guys, they just convince you in the interview, and then they go out there and they don't show up. And there could be situational things, like there could be something happening in their lives or whatever, but there's just some guys that don't show up come night. So I suspect I'm leaning Barrios only because I don't know where Keith's head at. It's not because I rate Barrios as a fighter. It's because I don't know where Keith's head at. Keith might go in there and show me something. Sean Porter called it out on the Porterway podcast. Check that out. It's a great podcast for boxing, where he wants to see the old Keith, the one that we saw in there against Danny Swift and in there against Sean Porter. But remember, Keith's had issues with body punchers before, and Barrios, he can go to the body when he needs to. He was going to the body against Tank. So I do think that there's a risk, and that's why I'm leaning Barrios, because I don't know where Thurman's head's at. And let's be honest, if it hadn't been for Keith's head, I think he would have beat Manny Pacquiao. I think his head wasn't right. He set it out to the fight. He was fighting for a draw. Once it got to a certain point in the cards, he was just fighting for a draw. To me, that's a mentally wrecked fighter, and I'm hoping that he shows us something. But at the same time, I recognize that it seems like he's got his focus in the wrong direction too. He's focused on getting a fight with Spence. Spence has come out and publicly said he's never going to fight Keith Thurman because Keith Thurman ducked him when he was on the way up. Keith kind of waves that off and says, "I'm still the name. I'm still the draw. And if you're a prize fighter, you should be fighting me," which I agree with. But I disagree with the notion that Keith should get an immediate shot based on what we saw of him. I would have rather seen Keith fight somebody like Virgil Ortiz for that WBA gold, which went mysteriously missing. So that's gone. Or I would love to have seen Keith fight Jordanius Ugas when he had the chance to immediately after he came back, because I think Ugas would have taken that fight. The WBA loves Keith, so I thought that would have been an easy shot. For whatever reason, he didn't go there. So it just feels like he's I don't want to say cherry picking because that's not fair, but it seems like he's trying to pick and choose his battles. He's a prize fighter. He's entitled. I'm just not a fan of that personally. So what we got is the strong probability we're going to see Spence and Jordanius Ugas, and I'm saying it right here and now. I don't think it's guaranteed that Spence beats Ugas, and I'm a big Spence fan. I've always been a Spence fan ever since I saw him blitz out Carlos Ocampo. But I've always been an Errol Spence fan. At some points, I've watched and said, okay, this guy looks like something. It's like eye test, but he proved it to me with Ocampo definitely going to war. Later, Algieri, Kell Brook, etc. I think he's a strong, solid contender in welterweight. He's done the welterweight division proud, in my opinion. Places like NSB and others dismiss him, but he's done everything he's supposed to do as a prize fighter in the business of boxing, and I can't hate on that. So, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he beats Ugas because I think Ugas is a solid, fundamental fighter. Ugas's potential mistake, the only one I can potentially see would be because he's been under the bright lights. He just fought Manny Pacquiao under the bright lights and he excelled. So I don't think he's going to be distracted by the star power because Spence is nowhere near Manny in star power. But I do think that Manny's style just was tailor made for Ugas in terms of the reach and the fact that Ugas is not afraid to throw. I think Spence's power is going to be the differentiator. If Ugas can avoid the power of Errol Spence, I think it's going to be a tough fight for Spence. If Spence lands bombs, I'm not sure Ugas takes those. It's not that Ugas has a glass jaw, he doesn't. But Spence's power, he seems to be able to generate power when he needs to, even though people criticize him because he hasn't gotten knockouts recently. I think that's because when you step up, you're not supposed to get knockouts. I covered that on one of the earlier episodes. You're not supposed to get knockouts when you step up in quality of opposition. That's why when the only rating that I gave Terrence Crawford at 147 is Sean Porter, and that was Kenny Porter that got the stoppage, not Crawford. So I don't rate any of the other stoppages that Crawford got because, with the exception of Jeff Horn, and there was sketchiness on that one, every single one of the fighters he fought were either on the decline, had already been heavily damaged in some way, or straight out crippled. With Jeff Horn, he took every advantage away from the guy, didn't want to fight him in Australia, faked a hand injury, which threw off Horn's camp. Like they did everything they could to disadvantage him. And Crawford to this day has said Horn was the toughest that he fought because, basically he was just awkward. He was not, it was hard to predict what Horn was going to do. And Horn lasted. He lasted a pretty good amount of rounds. And he was just tough. And Crawford was not able to effectively knock him out. And if you go back and watch the end sequence of that fight, Crawford whiffs 3 punches. The ref gets sketchy and stops the fight. Horn was never hurt. He's still on his feet. He's still evading punches. Horn accepted the defeat, but he asked for a rematch, and Crawford ducked it. So for the totality of 147, the only fight I gave Crawford credit full is for Sean Porter, and that's because I said anytime there's a stoppage on Sean Porter, you got to give the dude credit, even though it was Kenny Porter did it. But because I saw that this with Porter, basically he has that tendency where he seems to make those mistakes. That's what we saw against Ugas, where people thought, hey, Ugas might have beat Porter even on his own show. His host called out that, yeah, he should have rematched Ugas, and I agree with that too. Ugas is a tough contender. That's my point. He's a tough, solid, and people are underrating this guy. I think he's a solid contender just because he has losses. Every single loss was either highly controversial or extremely close and could have gone out of the way. He's a tough competitor. And so stylistically, I don't say that it's a foregone conclusion Spence beats him. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes the distance. Something tells me that Spence is going to win it unanimous 8-4, just like he did against Danny Swift. And Danny Swift is a solid contender too. And then Danny Swift got completely dismissed by NSB simply because he didn't have try against Spence, but he didn't have try because Spence wouldn't let him. Spence was all over this dude. So Spence, it's a solid fight. I'm excited for that one. But when we see this happen, Ugas says he's going to get him. I hope and pray that Ugas does win it. And the reason I say that is because I do think that Ugas has been kind of underrated and he's been overlooked and he's not getting the fair chances. And people don't really see him as a draw. He's not. And he deserves to get that spotlight, if only for once. Like Spence already has it. He's already at the top. He doesn't really even need the belts at this point because he's already able to draw money and draw power. And worst case, if he did lose the belts, he could still be a threat at 154. So I see that Spence has a strong future regardless of the outcome. Whereas Ugas, for me, mostly because of his age and his style and the way his style has lent to his length in the business, I think Ugas is the one that really needs this win for longevity's sake. But at some point, somebody then would beat Ugas, and that's okay. But I think he deserves the limelight because he has been overlooked many times. Moving on, Charles Martin. Remember, I covered that one about this dude. I never called him a bum, so don't quote me saying I called him a bum. I did not call him a bum. I said I don't rate him because I don't rate him. Even his own freaking trainer came out and said, yeah, that ref screwed up when I said that Martin was knocked out on his feet. He was completely out of it, and then he got his arm tied up in the ropes, and the ref should have stopped it. Ref didn't stop it. Ref had no urgency to stop it, and apparently the whole controversy from the trainer is, well, Ortiz hit Martin a couple times when he was defenseless, and one of them hit behind the head. I didn't see that, but maybe it did. I don't think it matters because the bomb that landed that knocked him out of his feet, the fight should have freaking been stopped anyway. But even his own trainer says that ref jacked up and should have easily stepped in and stopped it because, yes, it's the corner's job to help the fighter, but some fights, they have rules that only the ref can stop the fight. And this ref wasn't paying attention, so it's not like they could just throw a towel from the Martin corner and stop it. The ref had to do his job, and he didn't do his job. I 100% called that out, and I was shocked at the outcome that I saw, but not the way that went, but not the actual decision that happened, which was a knockout. Anthony Joshua came out and admitted that his strategy, and I didn't cover the fight because I was doing other podcasts and I didn't cover the fight. I didn't watch the fight live. I watched after the fact and kind of was just fast forwarding when I saw what was going on. But he's claiming that against Usyk, he wanted to box. He didn't want to be perceived as the big, stiff bodybuilder, which to me, that screams mental weakness because it means he's listening to social media. And I wish these boxers would stop doing that. Stop listening to social media because that should not define your career. Your job as a boxer is to prepare for the guy in front of you, however you need to do it. We knew that Usyk was a solid boxer. Like everybody admits, even those that are not fans of the dude admit he's a solid boxer. So you shouldn't be trying to outbox a solid boxer because you're just going to embarrass yourself. In that fight, from what I saw, Usyk's a smaller guy, naturally. Yes, he's built into heavyweight, but he's still a naturally smaller guy. To me, we needed Joshua to go in there and basically be the bully. Go in there and walk the guy down because we need to test him under fire. But I think he says this about the big stiff bodybuilder. That might have been part of it, but I also believe that in his mind, he's afraid to take punches because of what happened with Ruiz. And I think that's still with him. And he wanted to break the myth that he was going to run, but he was running against Usyk at points. To me, he needed to walk him down. It's kind of like with what was the fight? Jesse Vargas. I believe it was Jesse Vargas and Mikey Garcia, actually. I believe it was that one. Where it's like, dude, you're the bigger dude. Vargas, you're the bigger guy. Walk the guy down. What the heck are you doing? And some of these guys, they don't use their size like they're supposed to and don't want to engage, like go forward. And I don't know why that is. And then they end up taking a loss because, again, at worst, you convince the judges that your aggression should win you rounds, if nothing else. And I don't think Usyk has ever been under fire, except when he fought Chisora in the early rounds, he was getting wrecked. Okay, well, Chisora is a come-forward fighter. That should have taught you we need to test him with some aggression against a guy who's still in their prime. Chisora's not in his prime. So with Anthony Joshua, to me, that was an opportunity for Joshua to show that, hey, this big bodybuilder has its advantages. George Foreman wasn't boxing at range. When he was in his prime, George Foreman was just using his size and walking you down and clubbing you with strong hands. That's what needed to happen. It didn't happen. I don't know why, but that was really frustrating for me to see from Joshua and him admitting that, yeah, I was trying to break that stigma. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, dude, but I honestly think that sometimes the stigma can work to your advantage if you learn how to use it correctly. And he didn't seem to want to do that. That's his prerogative. He's in the ring. I'm not. I'm just calling out my opinion on what that was. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. He's been calling out Jake Paul. He wants to get in a fight with Jake Paul. He swears that he'll retire if he loses. We've heard that from Mayorga. I'd walk home if and he says, okay, I want to get a few million. But then there were claims he was asking 50-50 because of his name, and he's been living off his name, and we don't know if that fight happens. To me, I don't think the fight happens. In my personal opinion, if it does, respect to Chavez Jr. And if the terms are really legit, like he literally says, if I don't win that, I don't want to get paid. Respect to him. I'm skeptical, let's say. And then, poor Tommy Fury would have to just sit there and shake his head because I think Jake Paul beat Chavez Jr. because Chavez Jr.'s head's not in the game. The dude lost to Ederson Silva, who's not a pro boxer, and I know people rate him in MMA, but MMA is not boxing, and we keep saying that. So hopefully that fight does happen because I want to see Jake Paul knock the dude out. I don't hate the guy. He doesn't show up, and I'd rather see you get knocked out of the business for your own good. It's like, get out of the business, go away. Or, fight Sergio Maravilla. He's back, rematch him. That's a exciting fight. Maravilla, I'm sure, would be game for it because they're two names you fought before. You can sell the rematch, and I think that would sell huge in Mexico in particular. So who knows? And if you're a boxing fan and you don't follow, like there's some people on NSB who don't follow the smaller guys for whatever reason. They only pay attention to heavyweights, and then they complain when the heavyweights do like a Frank Sanchez and stink out the joint. Well, the thing is, the exciting fights are at the lower divisions, period. They always have been, predominantly. It was only during the highlight days, the Don King days, that you saw really strong, really durable, really exciting heavyweight action. And by and large, steroids played a large part in why we were seeing those kinds of exciting fights, those wars that we saw. Today, in a so-called clean sport, you really need to look at the lesser divisions. I would say even lesser than welterweight, but super flyweight has been exciting ever since these guys have come in, that we have the current class, the current crop of people. You got Carlos Cuadras, you got Srisaket Sor Rongvisai, you got Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez, you got Juan Francisco Estrada. You got some exciting fights here, and then you got guys like Ancajas who are tentatively coming to the division. You got Daenerys who says, hey, I might want to get in on that. And then you got guys who are like at 122 and 126 who theoretically could go down there. It's an exciting freaking division. They always show up, with the exception, I would say, of Estrada. Estrada doesn't really engage like you might think he should unless he's under fire. With Rungvisai, the last fight he fought against Estrada, Rungvisai didn't show up. He just didn't show up. I think Rungvisai should have beat that dude because Estrada didn't hardly do anything. He just basically boxed the range. Cuadras has been the lesser of the four, but he gives an exciting show of himself every time he's in the ring. Rungvisai is about to fight Cuadras. This is a rematch. The first fight, Cuadras beat Rungvisai. It was very controversial. I believe it was Rungvisai's first official loss. Now, Rungvisai had lost a couple times in his early career, and there's this whole big story around that time. Basically, and I don't want to bore you with the length of it, but in summary, his management team was essentially conspiring to have him take losses, to basically take dives. And as a result, he lost fights he shouldn't have lost because he wasn't trying to win them purposely so. So then after some points, he's actually at the point of poverty, homelessness. He's out eating out of dumpsters. He's in depression. Things are not going well. And then eventually he turns it all around. He gets a new camp. He gets everything refocused. And then he goes on this win streak, and you can look at his record, and he's dominant every single time, where it's like, why did these two happen? They happen because of a bad team that didn't take care of him. And so he has this inspirational story of, eating rats. Grilled rat is like one of his delicacies that he was eating, but at the time he was eating garbage just to survive and just to get by. He's an inspirational dude. And so I love seeing him in the ring because he has done exciting things. Of every fighter I can think of, he is one of the lifebloods I haven't covered yet. And it was sad to see that he was mistreated for losses that he really shouldn't have had. The loss against Estrada shouldn't have happened either, but he took it lightly, in my opinion, and he didn't go after Estrada like I think he should have. And he came out and said, well, I was training for the opposite hand that Estrada was doing. I was training for a switch. And I don't know why he was doing that, because every time he stayed in his normal stance, he was dominant against Estrada. So it's exciting to see him get this rematch against Cuadras, because the first fight was very controversial. People felt like Rungvisai might have gotten robbed. Regardless of what you think, it was a very exciting fight, and I expect another exciting fight between these two. They just did the initial weigh-in. That fight's happening in February. I'm telling you right now, if you don't watch the lesser classes, you need to watch this freaking fight, if only to convince you of what I'm saying to be true, which is that these guys at the super flyweights, they are the ones who will reinvigorate your love of the boxing game. They are the ones who keep the freaking sport alive. And you know why? It's because by and large, they're coming out of Mexico, and Mexico is what's keeping the sport alive today. People from America, they've moved on to MMA for the most part. They'll still watch boxing, but then every time you chime in, there's some sketchy judge decision or a weird ref doing something with a sketchy stoppage, or Kenny Porter stopping a fight when the guy's not barely hurt, or there's all this weirdness that keeps happening that frustrates people. In Mexico, that doesn't, you might have a sketchy decision, but it's like the extreme outlier. Most of the time, there's a knockout that leaves no doubt, or it's a dominant decision. Like the first time Rung Vijay fought Chocolatito, right? To me, I don't see any argument that Chocolatito won that fight because he got dropped. And when it's a close fight and you get dropped, to me, you cannot win. That's me. Just like with Porter and Spence, right? So Chocolatito gets dropped. And that was, I believe, the first time in his career he'd been dropped. It was early rounds, and it was not a flash. He got bombed. Rung Vijay was beating him down. This was a walk down bully effect on Chocolatito on that first fight. I saw no case for giving the fight to Chocolatito. NSB says he got robbed, whatever. That's not what happened. In the rematch, Rung Vijay, I called it out. I saw Rung Vijay. He's there. He's training in the jungle. He's eating grilled rat. This dude is hungry, and I'm like, Chocolo's gonna get hurt. Choco does a weigh-in. He posts a picture on social media, and he looks flabby. He looks chubby, and I specifically said he's gonna get himself hurt because he's not taking this serious. This dude is dangerous. Gets in there. What happens? 4 rounds. He loses every single one of them. Gets knocked out cold, flat on his back, just like Amir Khan. I have a photo side by side if you don't believe me. I'm telling you, these 4. Chocolatito, Estrada, Cuadras, Rung Vijay. These 4 are sustaining the excitement of boxing. They are worth watching every time. They will convince you that, no, you need to stop paying attention to the heavyweights now. Go back to the lesser classes because they're going to convince you boxing's still well alive when you put the right guys on the screen. But you got to put the right guys on the screen. Here's the downside. That fight, which is Rung Vijay versus Cuadras, is a co-main, aka the B-side, but it's a co-main to the return of Jesse Vargas fighting Liam Smith. I believe it's Liam Smith at 154. Yes, Liam Smith at 154. This is supposed to happen in January. It's been delayed to February 5th. It's going to now be the main event, unfortunately. And listen, Jesse Vargas, he's a tough fighter. He's a fighter that tries hard. You know, he's one of those that's a good hand. He's a good test for anybody in welterweights, and he's been able to do good showings of himself, but he's never able to break that glass ceiling. And it's not that he's not exciting to fight, but it strikes me as he's not able to beat the best, period. He wasn't able to do it at 147. The only guy of any credibility that I can call out that I remember that he beat was Adrian Broner, and that's because Adrian Broner didn't have try. Because Adrian Broner should have smoked him, in my opinion. Didn't happen. Vargas got his hand raised. I saw his performance against Mikey Garcia, and to me, Vargas should have won that fight, but he got dropped early, and that seemed to jack with his head because he wasn't trying hard against Mikey. Mikey's a smaller guy. Walk the dude down and take him out. He didn't do it. So now, him against Liam Smith, yes, it's 2 names. It doesn't really excite me that much just because I don't really rate Liam Smith, and I don't really rate Jesse Vargas. I suspect that they're going to give us a little bit of action, but I think we're going to see pretty much kind of one of these tentative boxing matches between 2 guys where Vargas, once again, is going to be marked tentative because Vargas, this is the first time at 154. If he wasn't able to pull it out at 147 and had no knockout power at 147, to me, I think 154 is going to be too much for him. That's my opinion. I suspect his retirement's going to be fighting against Danny Swift, who's going to go to 154. This is my prediction. But I'm really disappointed that became the main event over Rung Vijay and Cuadras, because to me, I'm telling you right now, people are going to see that it's Vargas and Liam Smith, and they're not going to dial in, except for people who happen to support, Smith from like overseas, and they're going to miss Rung Vijay and Cuadras, and that's not fair. It's really unfair because I'm telling you that co-main is going to be better than the main. You can mark me down, and after the fight, I'm telling you I will cover it. That co-main is going to blow out the main event in terms of the excitement factor. Promise you this. Cuadras is coming. Rung Vijay is coming. Both guys are vying for a shot against whoever wins in the Chocolatito Estrada rubber match. That means they're going to be hungry, and they're going to be exciting, and they're going to both come forward, and Rung Vijay's got something to prove. He's got to prove that he's still in the game. He's got to prove that he still can fight at the top level. Cuadras has had some slips. He's trying to prove something. You can mark me down and listen after the fight. That's all I'm going to say on that one. Amir Khan and Kell Brook, of course, they're fighting at some point in the future. And Amir Khan's being trained by Bomac, Brian McIntyre, of course, the trainer of Terrence Crawford. And apparently, Amir Khan's been sparring at least with Terrence Crawford. And there's a theory that Amir Khan will be able to catch Kell Brook with the jab that Crawford used to take out Kell Brook. I think the big difference between the two, in my opinion, is that, Khan was catching Canelo with jabs. Certainly. This is true. So it's not like he can't catch people. He can catch people even now, even at his advanced kind of physical age, the age of his body. I just think Kell Brook is going to time him and clip him and catch him and knock him out just like Canelo did, because Kell Brook is still a dangerous fighter that I don't think he will fight as tentative against Khan like he did against Crawford. This is my opinion on it. The one downside about that fight is I wish Nassim Hamed were there to kind of either moderate it or be somehow in the middle or do something to help pass the torch, because he's always kind of wanted this fight and then it never happened and then now it's happening and he's nowhere to be seen. And I know he's kind of eating himself into depression, but I think he should be there to help support these fighters that kind of looked up to him, because both of them, if you took the two of them and combined their skills, you end up with Nassim Hamed to some degree. I would lean more to Amir Khan than Brook, but certainly in terms of timing, Brook's timing is very close to what Hamed's was in his prime, and I just think that would help sell the fight a little bit more. It's going to sell out just because it's the two of them, and it's kind of that grudge, and there's a legit beef, and they can sell the fight. I think Nassim Hamed should put a stamp on it, bring some more eyes, people that remember the sport. As far as the Crawford and Bomac influence, my opinion is that it's not going to do much good for Khan. I think he'll have some great moments early on. I think Brook just catches him late. Cash Farouk, who was fighting at an early age, he retired. There's no reason why he retired. He was at bantamweight, so you may not have ever seen him, but he was kind of this believed to be up and coming guy, and people were really excited about him. It kind of reminds me of Pirog, Pirog, who fought Danny Jacobs, and he had to suddenly retire, but he had I think it was his back. Guys that were never able to realize their potential, and then they leave the business kind of early. That Cash Farouk's another one. He retired at 26. We never like to see fighters retire early. Hopefully he's okay and there's nothing physically wrong or anything. And then Tommy Fury, of course, living off his dad's name, living off Tyson's name. He's living off the whole reality TV stuff. He's still out chattering. There's kind of this beef that was supposed to happen with Jake Paul. It never happened because Tommy withdrew. He said he had a rib injury. He said he was infected, chest infection. Most people are still able to fight through it, but I think he wanted to be at 100%, but then he got criticism for backing out of the fight. But then after that, he said, okay, let's reschedule. Let's get back on. But he didn't reschedule it when he was infected and hurt. He just said, I'm out. The fight's off. So we don't know what's happening. He's chomping down. He's like, fight needs to happen. People want to see it. I'm here. Let's reschedule it. Let's do it. This is the way we prove him. If he fights Chavez Jr., there's no reason to fight Tommy. That's, you know what I mean? Like if Jake Paul fights Chavez Jr., if that fight gets signed, there is literally zero reason to fight Tommy Fury at that point, because Tommy brings nothing to the table. Tommy would have to beat somebody of more note than he has to convince Jake at that point, because Chavez Jr. is the bigger name by far and away. Even now in his decline, he's a bigger name, is Chavez Jr. So all the chattering Tommy's doing to me is like after the fact. It's kind of like that, yeah, you're lucky he held me back kind of thing from the old days. He's just champing, and I don't know what the deal is there. Derek Chisora apparently doesn't want to fight Deontay Wilder, or at least his management doesn't want to see him do that. I don't really want to see that fight personally. It's not that I'm against it. It's just, to me, the get back fight for Deontay Wilder that makes the best sense to me is Jarrell Big Baby Miller. And the reason why is because Miller has been doing nothing but talk trash on Deontay Wilder ever since he lost Tyson Fury in the second fight. And then Big Baby gets, basically, I think Joshua called him Big Pharma Miller, all these PEDs he fails for. Wilder has been on record talking about, the motherfuckers going to do these PEDs. They're just going to do it. Okay, then use that and so-called baptize him. Knock him out. Do that for the fans. You got two big mouth, loud mouth talkers who will sell it easy. They're both, Miller's still undefeated. He can sell it. He's undefeated. They're both gunning for a title opportunity. Miller was about to get a title opportunity before he failed for the test. Okay, you can use all this to sell the fight. To me, that's a more compelling fight than anything else for Wilder right now in a get back is Big Baby Miller. I do not want to see Chisora. I'm fine with Chisora fighting again, just not at the top level. Personal opinion. And on the other flip side now, let's get into the night of fights here that we got. At the head of this is a lightweight contest, Luis Nunez versus Carlos Arrieta. These guys are undefeated, and the event is headlined by undefeated fighters. That's why I said that I think it's going to be worth your time. This is happening on Showtime. It's out in Florida at the Caribbean Royale. It's going to start, if you're watching it live, I believe it's going to be at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., somewhere in that time frame, probably about 10 p.m. Eastern. I'm not sure on the Pacific, though, because they may do a dual cast where it's the same time. Like they may do it where it's, a certain time Pacific and then do another shot at a certain time Eastern. So I assume that it's 10 p.m. Eastern is the guaranteed since it's Florida. That would make it, of course, 7 p.m. Pacific. If you dial in at 7 p.m. and you don't see anything, that means they did some kind of dual cast deal and they're only, but that's weird because it's Showtime. And I believe it's ShoBox, which is the regular network TV. So, but they're undefeated fighters. I think it's worth watching. I don't know any of the names on this event. This is going to be one of those where you want to see the next, and that's why they call it ShoBox. ShoBox, the new generation. This is kind of the showcase for who we think is going to be the next stars in the division. This fight's happening today. So if you're going to watch it, it's going to be this evening. If you're going to get some friends over, get some friends, have them kind of go all in on the price of some food or whatever you do and just kind of do it as an event. But that's going to happen today on the ShoBox. But Nunez Arrieta, that's lightweight. So think of these guys as possibly in the mix to fight guys like, Tank Davis, potentially Devin Haney, at some point possibly Shakur, CM Punk, Kambosos, and others. They might be in the mix for this one. Castillo versus Aaron Yosen. I don't know either of these guys at all, but apparently they've had some decent wins. I don't follow them because this one's also at lightweight, but these guys have mostly been regional, so they haven't been at the world level to a heavy degree to where I can see kind of more of them. Now, I will say on what's going on with the lightweight division. Remember, Isaac Cruz is kind of now he's in the mix, and we want to see how he plays with all these other fighters. Your Ryan Garcias that he's trying to call out. Well, these guys are also coming in, and they may shuffle the bag a little bit. And remember, we haven't really tested Ryan Garcia. He has some solid wins, but I'm saying tested under extreme amounts of fire at the extreme top levels. He has not had that yet. He was supposed to fight Tank Davis. Remember, he went on Tyson's podcast, talking to Hot Boxing. Good podcast. I don't like a black and white noir, but good podcast. And he talked about 2 rounds. Tyson FaceTime Tank, and he told him 2 rounds to his face, and then ducked the fight, talking about, I want to fight Manny Pacquiao in an exhibition, which was never going to happen, and it didn't. And then both Tank and Devin said, yep, he was ducking, and that's what it looks like because he is frequently backed out of fights now. So you got a lot with these guys now. They're in the mix. That's the reason why there's an urgency for guys like Ryan Garcia to go ahead and test themselves against the best, because these young, hungry lions, as they say, are coming. They're coming in the division to try to take over. At super featherweight, we have Edwin De Los Santos. He's a very solid fighter, very impressive fighter. He's going up against William Foster. William Foster is a local regional. He has not been heralded, not been highlighted very much, but again, this is an event. This whole event is headlined by undefeated fighters left and right. So usually when you have undefeated fighters, with the exception of boring-ass Frank Sanchez, usually you have exciting action because, number one, they want to keep their O. Number two, they want to take the other guy's O and make a name for themselves. I think this event is worth dialing in. If you have access to ShoBox, to me, this is something that you should definitely watch on this dude and see about some of the next guys that are coming in these various divisions who are going to be threats to the ones who are already here who refuse to fight each other. That's my day of boxing today. I am going to be posting some of the other episodes from the boxing podcast here, and they're older episodes, but I want to post them here so it's all in one place. This is now kind of the default standard place to go for all things boxing. There is a podcast, an official podcast, that is going to be separated from Gentleman's World into its own boxing podcast. So Boxing will be a dedicated podcast going forward. So any updates I post here, as far as like the summary, here's what's coming type events, those will always be on YouTube. Anything I cover that is a secondary update, like my Lifeblood of Boxing series, which I'm going to be catching back up on, those will be also on the YouTube, and it's going to be on the separate podcast, which will be broadcast to all the different podcasting networks, including iTunes and Spotify. So if you want to listen on the go, you can. One thing I am kind of figuring out the mechanics and logistics of doing, I got really excited about doing it, would have been to do a live, anybody who's older remembers the live radio version of commentary for fights with, Howard Cosell and others, and the down goes Frazier. You remember those, right? And so my thought was to possibly do some of those for the big events. I'm talking the real interesting events that are kind of worth your time, maybe pay-per-view ones, and kind of cover those that way. That may come in the future. If there's interest, then I would basically provide that live commentary, the play-by-play, blow-by-blow type commentary in a radio type fashion, like it literally would sound like a radio. And here he goes with the left hook there, and he goes with the right hook down, and he's going up in the air, and then here he goes with that kind of thing, right? So obviously I'd have to clean it up, but something similar to where it gives you kind of that sense of, oh, wow, I'm listening along to the fight with the actual sounds and everything. It's an experience. If there's interest in doing that, that's something I would consider possibly doing. I'd have to figure out logistics, and then I would update you on what I'm doing on that one. But if there's not interest, then I simply won't do it, and I'll maintain the commentary pieces. That's all I got for you. Keep tuned. I will be back covering next week's set of fights because there's more fights happening in January. Some of them are worth your time. Some of them may not necessarily be. But if you're a boxing fan who watches everything, then maybe that is what it is. So far, there was supposed to be Joe Smith and Callum Johnson. Callum Johnson is he got COVID, so that's not going to happen. So I'm watching to see what's going on there. And so there's some fights up in the air to tentatively be signed. Once I get some more updates on what's going to happen, then I'll do a secondary update at that time. So it may not be Friday that I do that update because depending on what happens to the main events, some of these events may not happen because these fighters are acting stupid leading in the new year. That's all I got for you guys. Take care. Remember, go ahead and like it, subscribe, share it. I'm not going to do the stupid buttons because you know where everything is, but also I have my address in the beginning of the video. That is the address for the parent company for all podcasts. If you are watching crypto and have been interested in crypto and want to learn about crypto, we have a crypto podcast for you. If you just want to hear about life, the universe, and everything, we got a podcast for that. Everything is in development and building out over time, but the crypto podcast is hot and heavy, and my goal is to help people make money. So if you're interested in that, and you didn't like when Joe Biden, the president, went up on air and told everybody their money be worthless, you want to check in on that one too, because I think all of it ties together. Without money, things don't happen. A-side money.